So were black slaves here?
I understand you are drawing a comparison between the concept of free at the point of service in healthcare and the historical condition of enslaved individuals. However, it is important to clarify that the two are fundamentally different in nature. When Canadians refer to their healthcare system as free at the point of service, they mean that healthcare services are provided without direct out-of-pocket payments at the time of receiving care. Instead, healthcare costs are typically covered through taxes and government funding. This is a system designed to ensure access to healthcare services for all citizens regardless of their ability to pay. On the other hand, comparing this concept to the condition of enslaved individuals is not appropriate. Slavery involved the forced labor and exploitation of human beings, denying them their basic rights, freedoms, and autonomy. Slavery was an oppressive and inhumane institution, where individuals were treated as property and subjected to extreme forms of abuse and deprivation. It is important to be sensitive when drawing comparisons between different historical events or systems, as it is crucial to acknowledge the unique and significant impacts of slavery on individuals and societies.
Was slaves' health care free or no?
Slaves did not have access to free health care. Slavery was a system of forced labor and oppression, where enslaved individuals were considered property and had no autonomy or rights. Their well-being, including health care, was generally not a concern for slaveholders. Enslaved individuals often lived in harsh conditions with limited access to medical care. When they fell ill or were injured, their treatment was typically determined by the interests and priorities of their owners. Medical care for slaves, if provided at all, was primarily aimed at maintaining their productivity and ensuring they could continue working. It is important to recognize that the healthcare system, as we understand it today, did not exist during the time of slavery. The concept of universal access to healthcare or free healthcare at the point of service was not a reality for enslaved individuals.
If slaves got sick, did they pay for treatments or did their masters?
Slaves did not typically have the means to pay for their own medical treatments. It was generally the responsibility of the slave owner to provide medical care for their enslaved individuals. However, the extent and quality of healthcare varied widely depending on the individual slave owner and the circumstances. Some slave owners may have provided basic medical care for their slaves, either through their own resources or by calling on local doctors. However, the quality of care and access to medical professionals varied significantly. In many cases, medical treatment for slaves was focused on maintaining their ability to work rather than addressing their overall health and well-being. It's important to note that the provision of health care for slaves was not driven by a desire to promote their welfare, but rather to protect the investment and productivity of the enslaved individuals. The primary concern for slave owners was maintaining the labor force and ensuring that slaves remained fit for work. Overall, while some limited medical care may have been provided to slaves by their owners, it was far from comprehensive or equitable, and access to health care was highly dependent on the individual circumstances of the enslaved individuals and their owners.
So since the slave owner paid for it, it was free for the slave.
While it is true that slaves did not directly bear the financial cost of their medical treatments, it would be misleading to consider it as free health care. Slaves did not have control over their own bodies or health care decisions, and any medical care provided by the slave owner was primarily for the purpose of maintaining their labor and economic value. Slaves had no autonomy or agency in accessing health care. The medical treatments they received were not driven by a concern for their well-being or individual health needs, but rather by the owner's self-interest. The health care provided to slaves was a form of paternalistic control rather than a system aimed at promoting their overall health and welfare. Moreover, the health care provided to slaves was often inadequate, with limited access to medical professionals, inadequate resources, and treatments focused on immediate labor-related issues rather than comprehensive care. The conditions under which slaves lived and worked, including poor nutrition, harsh living conditions, and physical abuse, also contributed to their overall health disparities. So while it is true that the financial burden of healthcare was borne by the slave owner, it would be incorrect to characterize it as free healthcare for the slaves. The provision of medical care was part of the system of control and exploitation inherent in slavery, and it did not reflect a genuine concern for the well-being of enslaved individuals.